Thank you so much for coming today, especially on a beautiful sunny afternoon. This series of called Conversations on Collecting really reflects the core mandate of Griffin Art Projects. I'm the director, Lisa Baldessera, and this series has been going for a few years where we really explore the special relationship that collectors have with artists, with the works that they collect, and explore how it all comes together. Because often this is happening very quietly behind the scenes. So this is a really special series to really open up that process. And I'm delighted with the lineup that we have here today. I'm going to just acknowledge that Griffin is on the traditional unceded territories of the Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and we are grateful to undertake our work here. We are very also grateful for Canada Council support, North Vancouver Recreation and Culture, Canadian Heritage, and BC Arts Council in our programs. I am also delighted that we have Karen Tam with us here today. Dr. Karen Tam makes rare and fleeting appearances to Vancouver. Normally you'll see her online on our Zoom calls. This is the first time she's been here in 2 years. She's our adjunct curator at Griffin Art Projects and assists with researching and developing and delivering our public programs. Karen is a Montreal-based artist whose research focuses on the constructions and imaginations of ethnic spaces through installations in which she recreates Chinese restaurants, karaoke lounges, opium dens, curio shops, and other sites of cultural encounters. She has exhibited her work and participated in residencies in North America, Europe, and China, including at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts and the He Xiangning Art Museum. She holds a PhD in Cultural Studies from Goldsmiths University of London and an MFA in Sculpture from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She is represented by Gallery Hugues Charbonneau in Montreal. And Karen will be moderating the discussion today. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you. So welcome and thank you all for being here. I'm thrilled that we're able to hold Griffin's, I think, first fully in-person event since the pandemic. Today, so a conversation with collectors Anne and Marshall Webb and Andrew Booth as part of, again, conversations on collecting within the Per Diem exhibition, part 2. And thank you all for spending your afternoon with us. The title of the 2-part exhibition, Per Diem, as you all know, is in reference to Gert Metzdorf's habit of saving his per diem, I guess a very generous one, as a flight attendant to purchase artwork. And as part of the public programming that I did for the part 1 in 2022, we screened 2 documentaries on the legendary New York art collectors, Herb and Dorothy Vogel, who built a world-class art collection in their humble salaries as a postal worker and a librarian. The trajectories of collectors such as the Vogels and Metzdorf can be inspiring for aspiring collectors and for people who are interested in, interested in collecting art but feel that there are barriers to that, whether it's financially, perhaps they feel like they don't know enough, or other sort of perceived obstacles. So over the next hour and a half, maybe a little bit more, Andrew, Anne, and Marshall will be sharing with us their perspectives as seasoned and emerging collectors, their experiences, knowledge, and journeys into their collecting practices. And among the topics that they'll be discussing are the challenges and joys of building and maintaining an art collection, their collecting strategies, the evolution of their collections, and of course, living with art. So after their presentations, we'll open it up sort of as a conversation, and I'm sure you'll all have a lot of questions. I know I do, and so we can all kind of just be part of the collective conversation. So to start off, I'm going to read the bios. So Anne and Marshall Webb have been collecting Canadian and international contemporary art together for over 35 years. Initially, their collection focused on German artists, in particular the Dusseldorf-based photographers, which then led to works by many Vancouver lens-based artists. Over the years, their collection has evolved to include art in all media, including film, video, audio works, works on paper, sculptures, and painting. And selected works have been included in exhibitions in museums and galleries across Canada, US, and Europe. And the collection has been the focus of 2 public art gallery exhibitions. They've been both actively involved in the visual arts personally and professionally, and they'll tell you more about the history of how they met. And for Marshall, he's had a long and distinguished career as an English teacher at Upper Canada College in Toronto, and left the profession in 2016. And as a complement to his teaching, Marshall spent hours every weekend touring Toronto's art galleries. And these adventures led him to start buying art and to write about it. He wrote for many Canadian art publications, including Canadian Art, C Magazine, Galleries West, Vanguard, and Maclean's. For several years, he had his own radio show on the arts for Ryerson University's radio station, which consisted in live interviews with artists showing in Toronto galleries and museums. In addition, for Art Toronto, he organized the International Speakers Program for 2 years, and at the Vancouver Art Gallery, he presented 2 seasons of talks on the art of collecting as part of their patrons' programming. Marshall has held volunteer positions on the boards of the Art Gallery of York University, Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery, and Vancouver Art Gallery. Anne has held key positions with leading art and cultural institutions, including the Vancouver Art Gallery, Royal Ontario Museum, Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery, Canadian Art Foundation, and Canadian Opera Company. She's also provided consulting services to organizations including Art Toronto. She has more than 35 years of experience working directly with artists, curators, writers, filmmakers, and collectors, curating programs, exhibitions, and events across the country and internationally. She's worked with artists such as Marina Abramovic, El Netsoi, Bill Burns, Douglas Copeland, Isaac Julian, and Glenn Lincoln. In 2004, she's founded the Real Artists Film Festival, which ran for 10 years until 2014, North America's only documentary film festival devoted to visual art and artists, and has delivered talks across Canada about the value of museums and collecting art, and interviewed numerous artists and cultural figures. As a volunteer, advisor, and mentor, she has contributed her time and shared her expertise with numerous individuals, arts, and cultural organizations across Canada. Now, to Andrew.
Much shorter.
So to Andrew, who's our first speaker, Andrew is an art collector and curator of the Vancouver Art Blog, an Instagram account devoted to promoting and showcasing Vancouver's contemporary art scene.
That's it. Talk is over. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Karen. And thank you to Lisa and the rest of the Griffin staff for hosting events like this, for hosting talks like this, especially on this topic. I'm glad that we're doing this in person and not on a Brady Bunch Zoom grid. That's what my work day is like anyways, so I'm glad to see you all in here on a day like today in particular. I thought I'd frame my conversation around the insights of an earlier young collector. I've started collecting just as the pandemic hit, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But mostly I want to share my enthusiasm around collecting, and perhaps along the way dispel some misconceptions, offer some advice in sort of the early days or the early years of my collecting, and of course share some of the works from my collection with you and sort of the philosophical decisions behind that. So here I am in my 700 square foot apartment. This is most of it. There's Archie. And a quick disclaimer before I get into this, I want to be particularly sensitive around the timing of this talk, in the sense that the era in which we live right now, the cost of living, especially in Vancouver, it's challenging for many people. So I don't want to make it seem like everyone should be collecting. I realize art collecting is not at the top of people's hierarchy of needs, but I do feel like there is a sentiment here that collecting is more accessible than many people may realize. And I think both this exhibition and myself are testaments to that. And of course, I thought it would be appropriate to start with a bit of grounding or context as to how I got into art in the first place, and then eventually the blog. But it all really started here. And on the right-hand side, you see a photograph of a skateboarder. When I was younger, in my formative years, skateboarding was my community. And from there, it's fairly art adjacent, in the sense that it's a form of self-expression. There's a lot of visual elements to it. It's closely related to music, clothing, the way in which you dress, act, the people you hang out with. So I think this planted the seed for me in terms of eventually joining this community, the arts community, the collectors community, and so forth. So it's always been ingrained in me to be a part of a community. Also, The middle photograph there is a Rolleiflex camera from 1954, which I have, that was gifted to me from my grandfather. And the photograph on the left-hand side is a photograph I took in high school because you had to choose an artistic elective. I chose photography because I thought I can shoot photographs of my friends skateboarding, but little did I know that it actually allowed me to sort of see things through the viewfinder of a camera. I started to think about things as images, which kind of lends itself to the blogging that I've started a few years ago. So how it started from the point of my art life, I guess you could say, is the Vancouver Art Blog. So in 2019, I was looking for a resource. So as I didn't mention this, but I didn't go to art school, hence my very brief bio. But I didn't go to art school, but I had an interest in art, and it was, again, because of the skateboarding, photography, and just this slow burn over those years. When I started to get more interested in exploring art galleries in Vancouver, I was looking for a resource that showed me what's happening in Vancouver's art world. Surely there's someone documenting this or talking about it. But at that time, all that there was and Instant Coffee is a great resource, but it's text-based, and for someone that's not an artist, it was hard to sort of figure out, find the signal through the noise, so to speak. Like, just show me what exhibitions are happening. So I couldn't find that resource. And I thought, well, Instagram is sort of a low barrier of entry for folks. It's a visual-based platform. This seems like a good place to put this content and start from there. So I started uploading photos from my journey through in and around Vancouver's art scene. And that's where I know so many of you, either gallerists or collectors or artists. And just did that kind of behind the scenes. I didn't want it to be about me. I didn't want the focus to be about my travels per se, but more so just as a holistic view of what's happening in Vancouver's art world, from the Vancouver Art Gallery all the way down to the wonderful project spaces that are happening that don't get as much, perhaps, coverage, or just to give equal coverage to those spaces. You can see here there's some images from the first half of Gaird's exhibition there on the left-hand side, and some nice studio visits as well. And then the collecting side of things, how did that all start? So not long after 2019, of course, March 2020, we all know what happened there. When the pandemic hit, my actual 9-to-5 job, if you can believe, I don't get paid to blog. I have an actual full-time job, which is working in tech. So I feel like I was very lucky and fortunate to be able to pivot to working from home. The second that the pandemic became serious, we started working from home. So I was looking around my very bland and uninteresting apartment and thinking, this might be my opportunity to actually surround myself with a more dynamic space and to collect works that I can live with and be in dialogue with more regularly. Especially in the beginning part of the pandemic, I might not have left my house for days, right? So it was important for me to surround myself with a particular energy. And this is where it started, was with this Gigamay Cookwitz painting acquired through Macaulay Fine Art. What else did I want to say on that? Yeah, so I'd say in a weird way, the pandemic had a lot of silver linings for me because it sort of catalyzed my collecting. I realized that since I'm not going to be traveling or commuting to work or eating out as much, I could manage my finances in such a way that allows me to actually acquire more serious, air quote, serious works rather than just decor or decoration. The other aha moment for me was the actual acquisition of this work, because up until this point, I had assumed, like I'm sure many folks on the outside looking in, that in order to acquire art, you might have to roll up to the gallery with a briefcase full of money and you exchange for the artwork. But it dawned on me that a payment plan, meaning I could pay off this work over a period of time, allowed me to not have to write a big check or to make some lump sum payment, but rather pay a modest amount of money every month and actually live with the art pretty quickly. And that really is how the snowball started rolling down the hill. And again, I'm sure everyone in this room is familiar with that, but I can tell you that it's not advertised when you walk into a gallery, and rightfully so. So, normal people would bought posters is what Marshall said, yeah. And I did. I had a bunch of, dorm room art, right? It was not anything interesting, but it has since changed considerably. So I thought I would share with you for the portion of my talk just 5, everyone loves lists. So here's 5 insights that I've learned, and there's many sub-bullet points, so I may refer to my notes because there's a lot of important things to talk about. First and foremost, art collecting is more accessible than commonly thought. And this, of course, is the spirit of this conversation, I think, from my perspective, because it was what I talked about earlier, is both the the ability to collect is more approachable, but also just maybe reframing the excitement that I get from living with art. So a common misconception here perhaps is that art is only for the most wealthy and it requires a lot of money, or that art is expensive. And while art is of high value in many cases, there's obviously many price points or entry points for acquiring art. There's editions, there's smaller works, that's all pretty obvious. But I also think it's important at this stage for me to just kind of define how I categorize myself as a collector, because the term art collector carries many connotations. So I'll be frank, I struggled with that term for the first few years of my collecting. I didn't necessarily define myself as a collector. With the Gigame Cookwitz painting in particular, I didn't see myself as a collector then, and I wasn't. I had bought a painting. And even the first few acquisitions, I still felt it was all a bit disjointed. They were separate, they were acquired in sort of a vacuum. I didn't think holistically about what was I bringing together, what was I doing. And so that was a big moment where I defined that I have to think about this as the collection being greater than the sum of its parts, and that there should be focuses and areas that I focus on. So going back to how I would define myself as a collector, first and foremost, like Gerd, I'm a caretaker for an artist's life work, right? These artists spend their life making these works. So there's a lot, they're very loaded works. There's a lot that goes into these. So I feel a great duty and responsibility of taking care of these works and having a relationship with them that is the act of a caretaker, as opposed to just owning the works. Because the artworks will live beyond me, right? They'll go somewhere potentially, but this is I take this with a great deal of responsibility of caring for these works as a sort of custodian or caretaker. I also feel like my role as a collector, and hence the blog, hence these educational talks, is to go beyond just the acquisition of the works, but how can I provide inspiration or education or resources for other folks like me that were on the outside looking in. So the art ambassador / patron hat is one that I also wear, and many folks in this room do as well, and contribute in their own ways. And then lastly, I'm also kind of playing the part of a curator, right? Or a storyteller, I'll maybe simplify it. But I think what I'm doing, and I think what most collectors are doing, is they're bringing together works that tell a story, or that their collection tells a story. Each artwork, each artist tells a story, each artwork tells its own story. And so what happens when you bring these all into a space and you sort of keep adding to this spider web that evolves and you keep contributing to? And that to me is the exciting part, right? That's where you can really, this sort of force multiplier of bringing in works that change the sort of tone or the nucleus of the collection. And that to me is one of the more inspiring elements to collecting. What's next? It's all backwards on my screen. So develop your taste. Hugely important step that I didn't realize until a little bit later on was actually having a solid foundation of your taste. And that's a bit abstract, I realize, like what does it mean to develop a taste? But I actually think it was, for me, the process of going and seeing art on a regular basis. In order to cover Vancouver's art scene, I don't have to go, I love doing it. But every Saturday, go out to different galleries, take photographs, talk to gallerists, artists, curators. So that process I didn't realize, but was actually me sort of forming and developing my own taste. I would see all sorts of art. And I think the lesson that I would say here is to see a lot of art, see good art, see bad art, see very bad art. Because what you're doing is you're forming these sort of decision trees in your mind and saying, okay, why do I like this? Or why does this frustrate me? Or why does this make me feel a certain way? And that act is kind of building that muscle, that inner muscle of understanding not just I like that painting, but why do I feel a certain way about it? And especially for the works where it's like, that's not really for me, but like asking the question of why. I think that three-letter word is very important throughout the whole like concept of collecting, is always asking why. Why do you like it? Why don't you like it? Why did you acquire it? Why did you pass? And so on. Collecting art is a creative practice in and of itself, right? I just talked about being a kind of a pseudo-curator, but you are, collecting is a reflection of your personal taste. So I feel like if you're building a collection, a meaningful collection that is a mirror of your own taste, you should probably first spend some time in making sure that it's a well-matured, sophisticated taste. And that's different for everybody because every collection is going to be different, but I think it's first to really understand what you're interested in and, importantly, why you're interested in it, and then that sets you on a particular path for perhaps collecting certain works. I talked about, well, actually here, let me just get into what excites me, because when we think about a reflection of someone's taste, it's often related to what excites them. And I thought I'd just kind of rattle off a few things that excite me. And as an oversimplification, and I think many of you can relate to this, is I'm excited by an artist's ability to take an idea or a concept and turn it into some material form. Taking nothing and turning it into something, right? So whether that be a sculpture, a performance, a video work, a music piece, I can understand and empathize with an artist's ability to sit in front of a blank canvas and then try and get a thought out onto the painting and tell their story through some material form. So that really excites me, and the many ways that artists do that, I mean, just look around this room, there's so many different material ways that artists choose to tell their stories. So that really inspires me. I'm interested by things I don't understand, which sounds kind of weird, but I love the idea of kind of being challenged with this sort of riddle of contemporary art. The easiest metaphor or analogy I can use to describe that is if someone tells you a riddle and your mind is spinning to try and understand that riddle, you're trying to solve that riddle. Like if I could bottle that moment where you haven't solved the riddle but you're trying very hard, that's what I look to get when I encounter challenging or interesting works, is this kind of hamster wheel spinning in the brain, trying to solve something that you don't understand. That to me, musically, art, everything I love. And of course, I'm interested in the art of storytelling, so the artist's ability to tell a story in some sort of visual form. One other thing about storytelling is I also think not just the artist and the artwork tell a story, but the acquisition is sometimes an interesting story. I was with Anne and Marshall in Berlin recently. You all might have seen some posts about that or heard about our travels. But going back to the dinner at Hamburger Bahnhof with Mehdi and Sedan, I acquired a work in Berlin. It was a drawing by Sedan Afif, or commissioned by Sedan. And that led to us having dinner with the artist and the gallerist in this beautiful venue. And so now I have this piece that commemorates this very special moment in my travels, where Stuart and Della were there as well. So this piece will always remind me of that moment, which I think is really special. I talked a little bit about this already, but embrace challenging work. Again, the idea of like not fully understanding what it is that I'm encountering. I think that this, to me, is the secret sauce and something that I didn't really realize until a little bit later on. What I felt I had been doing perhaps at the beginning was buying work or acquiring work that I liked. And I think that's a very dangerous alarm that it usually indicates you like it because it feels safe or it feels familiar. And I actually think I'm now very much deliberately looking to be challenged by the work. If I see something and I say that I like that, that actually, to me, triggers a bit of an alarm bell thinking, okay, maybe this is actually something I'd get bored of a little bit quickly. I want work that's going to stay. I feel like challenging work has a longer staying power. And I'm seeing some nodding heads, and that's hopefully not people falling asleep, but people agreeing with me, because I think that this is something that took me a little bit of time to realize. And especially in the context of living with work, right? Because it's one thing to see these works in a white-walled gallery, but then bring it into your space where you're literally engaging with it at all times of the day. And I think that totally changes the energy of the work as well. This is the part where I get really philosophical, but you know, an artist's responsibility, it's an old cliche, but an artist's responsibility is creating the work is 50% of the work. The other 50% is you, the viewer, engaging and putting yourself in the work and being in dialogue with the work. So just imagine how that feels now, sort of in the intimacy of your personal space, in your home, amongst all these other works that have all these other loaded stories behind them. So that maybe is hard to contextualize when you're in a gallery space, but think about it now in your home amongst all these other works that have great meaning to you. Define a focus. I think this will be another important sort of milestone, or this was an important milestone for me, was sitting down and acknowledging that what I was doing felt a bit disjointed. There were just collecting works one piece at a time and not really thinking long-term, what am I bringing together here? What am I doing? So I felt with defined focuses of areas that this is allowing me to collect or to put together a collection that was greater than the sum of its parts. Other works were able to sort of prop up other works in the collection. You can kind of imagine some works being more central and then sort of webbing out from there, or perhaps there's overlap and there's works that are in dialogue or in contrast of each other. So that to me was where the sort of curatorial hat came on, as bringing works together that felt like it was a more cohesive collection, a more sophisticated collection. In terms of how this kind of works into some of the other lessons that I've learned is that by defining a focus and by developing your taste, one of the sort of conundrums you're faced with is you have to do your research but act quickly. And that's kind of a mantra that I think about all the time, is that in contemporary art, or in terms of acquiring art, most of these works are unique, so there's only one of them. So if you really want something, you typically have to act quick. But how do you do that without making a foolish decision or feeling like you have buyer's remorse? That's where I feel like the foundation of developing your taste while also having a focus gives you some parameters to work within, so you know more confidently this work makes sense in this collection. Areas that I focus on, I'll get into that as I click through some of my own collection here, but remember, you're the curator of your own collection. And I think it's appropriate to say that you are curating a collection that is a private collection. But the fun thing about this, in the last 3 years living and working from home, it's just been an ever-changing space. I'm always reorganizing work. Michael, you just talked about reorganizing the office and how that kind of changes the energy of the space by just simply moving things around and changing the partnerships or the pairings or the placement of work. It totally is, I feel, as a material difference in my quality of life. And the last 3 years have been challenging, of course, but I would argue that it's been good in a lot of ways for me because of art. And that's my final point here, is the joy of living with art. I mean, I could spend the next 4 days talking about this, but we all have jobs. But I cannot overstate the benefit that I've received from living with art, and the joy of, in every step along the way of acquiring art, both the relationships with gallerists and sometimes the artists and other collectors. Every time we get a chance to go and visit private collections and see how other collectors are curating their own selection of works, it just validates what I'm doing, and it really inspires me to learn about new artists, see different mediums that I've never seen before, different experimentations. And like I said, it just changes the dynamic of the space. So let me give you a quick tour of some of the works in my collection. This is not everything, but I also thought it'd be fun to sort of bring you into my space, because you see the works in a white-walled gallery, but you don't often see them next to a couch or by a TV or with people living around them. So starting off here, this is Jack Kenna's work from Equinox. I love Jack Kenna. I think I've got 2 works from him, but I think he's a rising star. Next to Mark DeLong and Alex Tedley Stursberg, who had a great artist talk yesterday at Monty Clark. So in terms of areas that I focus on, there's 3, one of which is contemporary Indigenous art. So what we're looking at here is a painting by Brenda Draney, a tarp sculpture by Janine Freyne-Jutli, and a sculpture by Joseph Tizica, as well as a Marcy Friesen sculpture there. And there's a nice story about Marcy Friesen and how Ann and Marshall and I actually met. Without meeting. Well, maybe I'll talk about that. So Marcy Friesen had a solo show at Fazaka's gallery a couple years ago, and there was this really beautiful hunting hat that was on display, the orange one. You would have seen it if you went to that exhibition. And I saw that there was a little half sticker on it, so it was not spoken for, but someone was interested. And I asked Lulu at the time, I said, I'd really like that work. And she said, someone's considering it, I'll revisit, I'll circle back and I'll revisit if they're serious about it. Turns out it was Ann and Marshall. I did not meet them yet, but then I said, okay, I really loved Granny's Soup, which is this fox sculpture here, and I was happy to take it and thrilled to have it. And then many weeks later, I end up going to Ann and Marshall's place, and there is the fox taunting me. But it's in a good home, I'll say that. And and this Marcy Friesen's work. Yeah, Mike. The Museum of Andrew Booth. Yeah, and I think I don't know if the contrast is, you're able to see this here. It's a Arctic fox pelt that's lying along a shelf with beads coming down from the eyes as like their tears, and then there's a bowl with a spoon and blue beads on the body of the fox. And so Marcy made this work as an homage to her grandmother who had dementia. And she used to make soup for Marcy, and this is like a very comforting experience. So she made this work as an homage to her grandmother who passed away a number of years ago, but as sort of a gesture or as an offering to her grandmother as both her beadwork practice and the soup that she ate as sort of a form of comfort. Another one, I didn't know how to brand this one. I put Photography X because not always is it pure snapshots or photography, but I love art. I mean, again, it goes back to my Rolleiflex and my interest in photography, but I'm really interested in artists that are exploring sort of the boundaries of photography. So what you see here is works by Jeremy Shaw, Lotus Laurie Kang, and Jerry Pethick. I think there's a material similarity between these works to some extent, both with like the fractal lens that Jeremy uses, the cameraless technologies that Lotus Laurie Kang uses, and then Jerry Pethick's flash array camera, and then Owen Kidd's durational photography. So this is around artists that experiment with photography as an element of their practice, but not always a pure snapshot. And then lastly, emerging and mid-career Canadian artists. So left to right, there's Maggie Hamel-Metzos out of Montreal, Michelle Bouy, also out of Montreal, and then you have Jeff Halbauer, who's in the house. I know, sorry to call you out there, Jeff. And then Marisa Kringwatt-Holmes and Kira Pratt as well. So to recap, this is the home stretch for me. See lots of art, see it in person. Like if my blog is if you can take anything out of my blog, it's not a virtual viewing room. It's meant to get you to go to these spaces, to engage with the gallerist, to engage with the work in person, as opposed to it being condensed down to the size of your phone. Develop your taste, so you're doing that in the process of going to galleries and seeing the work. Embrace challenging work, so think outside of what comforts you. Think what is going to maybe disrupt or push you or make you feel a little bit of friction. Those are actually good signs. And collecting is a lifelong endeavor. So even as I think about my collection now, this is not it in its final state. It's going to evolve. My tastes will evolve. They're going to grow. The collection's going to morph. The nucleus of the collection is going to change. So remember that if anyone here has not yet taken the plunge in collecting and you acquire your first piece, don't think that that piece that you've acquired has to be sort of the center of this ecosystem. You can move on from that. And then lastly, the joy of living with art. And I think that's where we'll maybe go into the next set of slides here.
Thank you, Andrew.
My pleasure.
Wonderful. Those were wonderful tips and just like learning how you started collecting and just the generosity in sharing like your journey through the Instagram, but also here today. And so thank you so much.
Thank you.
So next we'll move on to Anna Marshall.
No, it's just as a sidebar, Andrew mentioned time payments. Before I ever met Anne, I was on my own, and money seemed no object at the time, but I was writing post-dated checks, so many by the end of the month, that eventually I ran out of checks and my rent was due. And I had read that you could write out a check on a piece of paper and that would be valid. I guess that was made before barcodes. So I wrote out to my landlord my rent check for that month because I had no checks available. And I slipped that under his door in an envelope. But I did return a few days later with a real check. But he did accept it. He didn't cash it. But he took that as, so you post-dated, this was in the day of post-dated checks, which dates myself automatically right there, doesn't it? Yeah, but we'll get there in a minute. So but before we gathered here, Anne and I and Andrew had some discussion along with the staff at the Griffin about a word mentor. And Andrew was keen to, in the beginning, was perhaps keen to use this word mentor, and I wasn't so keen because having been a teacher and being assigned as a mentor to students, I thought that's really too formal a term to be using in our relationship. But then after we decided we're not going to use that word anymore, I began to think about it and thought, well, maybe mentoring can take on all kinds of forms that are less formal and much more informal that, other people may be aware of, that they're actually sort of mentoring you, or that it's just something that can be happening in passing. It could be a person, it could be an exhibition, it could be an art exhibition, it could be talking to an artist at dinner. So we didn't want to use the word, and so we moved on to other ideas. And we acknowledge that people, places, exhibitions, ideas, artworks that have inspired us, and that's what we'd like to talk a bit about today. So you may be wondering what these things are. This is pre-internet information. From 1997 to about 2014, Anne and I carried around notebooks with us to every place we went. Dinners we had with people, art exhibitions, galleries, art fairs, and we made notes of the things that attracted us. Anne she'll explain later, had a trip to Belgium where I noticed here, she even sketched out people's living rooms and how they had the art displayed. So these are kind of inspirational notebooks. And I was looking through one of them, and I note that on March 22nd, 1997, I wrote, "Ideas, a collection built on the idea of when ideas or attitudes become form, language becoming sculpture or painting," and I put the word painting in quotation marks, which will explain. "Not representing the physically visible, representing the imagined, the imaginable, create what one thinks." So let's see if that happened.
So we'd like to share a few of our stories with you and then show you some artworks that we currently live with. So we'll save that till the end. So in 1985, before Marshall and I met, the exhibition, The European Iceberg, at the Art Gallery Ontario, curated by Germano Chalant, had a significant influence on both of us individually. There we saw works and ideas that were totally new to us that we did not completely understand. The exhibition featured the Italian arte povera with artists such as Mario Merz, Giuseppe Pennone, and German artists including Gerhard Richter, Thomas Schutte, Sigmar Polka. In terms of scale, ambition, and ideas, these were works unlike anything we'd seen in Toronto galleries before. Subsequently, the AGO mounted Gerhard Richter's first retrospective in North America. That was in 1988. And the works were universally mesmerizing. Again, scale, ambition, innovative techniques in painting made us realize there was something happening beyond the local scene in Toronto.
Until 7 years ago, Anne and I lived in Toronto, and in the late 70s and 80s, there were a number of important galleries in Toronto, including the Odessa Henley's gallery. And she had a huge international reputation, and she presented strong Canadian artists. She had, in her, let's say, 5 years of exhibiting, she had only one German artist. The rest were all Canadian, including Jeff Wall, Ken Lum, Rodney Graham, Liz Magor, Sander Meigs, and Jonas Sterback. And another important venue was the Art Gallery of York University, up north of Toronto, at the University Art Gallery. An amazing Loretta Yarlow was the director there, and she had strong links to Europe. And she gave the Canadian premiere and even the North American premiere exhibitions of Luc Tuymans, Mark Manders, Marlene Dumas, Hiroshi Sugimoto. And so these exhibitions, along with the ones that Anne's mentioned, told us that there's something out there beyond the merely local.
So when we married in 1987, we decided that if we were going to do this thing called collecting together in a serious way, meaning we were going to dedicate our time and resources to acquiring and living with art, we needed to have a focus. That decision took us to the highly regarded Chicago Art Fair in 1988. And at the time, it was a fair second only to Basel, and we hadn't been there. We knew little and no one, and Toronto was not the place it is today. Like, now there's collectors groups and people travel. That wasn't happening. Like, there was no collecting community, and that's another story. That evolved. But we pretended that we had a blank check and could buy anything we wanted. So we made a list of the artworks that stood out for us at the fair, and we went back to the hotel bar and reviewed that list. And it turned out that the list consisted of mostly European artists, mostly German and photo-based. And at the time, we did not know why these works resonated with us, but we decided to proceed from there.
So with a bit of research, we learned that there was something called the Becherschule, or the Becker School, out of Düsseldorf. And they were teachers of something that became known as the Düsseldorf Academy. And their students were just emerging as artists. Candida Höfer, Thomas Ruff, Andreas Gursky, and Thomas Struth. So our first acquisitions were the Beckers and their students. The first 5 years, we bought almost just about exclusively photo-based work. So Andrew's point about keeping focused. So in addition to the Germans, we also bought works by Stan Douglas, Ian Wallace, Ken Lum, and Rodney Graham.
Our visits to the Chicago Art Fair became an annual May ritual for about 5 years. And it was in Chicago that we encountered the Vogel collection that was on exhibit at the Terra Foundation. Their biography wasn't grandiose, nor was their collection. The works hung together nicely, and the artworks seemed like they were having a conversation with each other. It was in Chicago where we met Marvin and Elaine Mortis, Baltimore-based collectors who had spent considerable time in Belgium. European conceptual art was a strong part of their collection, and our relationship with them led to an invitation to join them and a few American collectors on an art tour in Belgium in 1998. On that trip, our world continued to expand. Marshall wasn't able to join that trip. I met astute Belgian collectors and became familiar with Belgian artists, as well as meeting experienced European and US collectors who shared their thoughts and ideas. I spent an entire week with people who talked about art 24/7. It was quite the immersive experience. Later, Marshall had the opportunity to meet the group, and the encounters we had with these established collectors were inspiring, encouraging, and affirming.
Another important encounter in Chicago Art Fair was the Paris dealer Philip Nelson. We knew of him as he had given Thomas Ruff his first exhibition of the large-scale portraits. He also showed Ken Lum and Rodney Graham. At his gallery, we were introduced to many new artists.
Say too that in Belgium, what was important to us, or what we were learning in Belgium, is that many collections focused on minimalist and conceptual works, which we found appealing. So, on one visit to Paris, Philip Nelson drove us to Antwerp to view an exhibition and to have an introduction to two collecting couples, Anton and Annick Herbert, and Yannick and Wilfred Koorman. We'd never met either couple, but the language of contemporary art united us. This visit remains a fond memory, and we still keep in touch with the Koormans. From the great Belgian collectors, Anton and Annick Herbert, we learned that you don't collect for your walls, you collect for your lives. Anton stated that they didn't collect artworks, but a new way of thinking. Their massive collection presented largely European and American conceptual art from 1968 to 1989, such as Ankawara, Joseph Kosuth, Mario Mertz, John Baldessari, and many others. Their collection is bookended by the Paris riots and the fall of the Berlin Wall, during which time minimalist conceptual art and arte pauvre were thriving.
I was happy to learn that Willa Bale, just back from Europe, had lunch with our friends, the Koormans, and we went to visit them in their house. There wasn't a lot of space to eat because they had shoved the dining room table right up against the wall to make room for a floor sculpture. And I think jokingly, somewhat jokingly, they said they were looking forward to when their children would move out of their house so they could take over their bedrooms to expand their collection. Much of their work is in the Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven, as it is too large to install in their home. So what they did is we sat down on the couch and they brought out a massive binder and they took us through their collection, which is all stored in binders. And Belgians love certificates of authenticity.
So having seen the Vogel collection in Chicago in 1989 and reading about them and seeing them on an infamous 60 Minutes episode where Dan Rather cannot believe that a 1-inch piece of rope nailed to the doorframe, an artwork by Richard Tuttle, is actually art. If you haven't seen it, Google it. It's pretty fantastic. It was a bit of a dream come true that we actually got to meet them in their New York City apartment in 2009. Even though by this time they had donated their collection to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, there was still a lot of art on view. It turns out that the proceeds they gained from the donation, which was supposed to be for their retirement, had gone into buying more art. Collectors cannot be helped. There was virtually no furniture, a small kitchen table, 3 chairs, a kitchen filled with books that hadn't been used, a small washroom with a silhouette pencil drawing on the wall, and a living room with aquariums filled with turtles. This visit confirmed for us their total dedication to contemporary art and living with that art. Art was central to their lives. Again, we'd never met these people. We felt that we sort of knew them. Our meeting was over art and our various experiences, but mostly theirs. We listened attentively and somewhat in awe.
Our travels took us further afield. In 1991, we were invited to Arco Art Fair in Madrid, and that's where, although I was by myself at the time, unfortunately, we met Victor Giesler of May 36 Gallery. And I have a feeling that based on the first iteration of Gertz's collection and this one, we were on very similar trajectories. Over here in the corner, there are 2 really fine examples of Pia Friese's paintings. She's a Swiss or German artist who showed at May 36 Gallery. And we certainly saw her paintings right around the same time. But if you remember, I mentioned painting in quotation marks. So that would have been too much paint for us at one point. So we never bought her work, but those are 2 stunning examples. And through extended conversations with Victor Giesler and learning about his program, we began to move our collecting further afield, eventually collecting Matt Mulliken, the American conceptual artist. His work considers systems of knowledge, meaning, language, and signification, and the relationship between perception and reality. Matt Mulliken's work is central to our collection, and Victor Giesler has unwittingly been a mentor to us for the past 30 years.
As we lived in Toronto, travel to New York was only an hour away. There, our education was furthered through our conversations with art dealers and visits to galleries and museum exhibitions. On these trips, we regularly visited David Zwirner, who opened in 1992. This was when he had 1 staff person, and Michael Werner Gallery. We knew the director of the Werner Gallery, who happily welcomed us to visit behind the scenes. There, we discovered the poetic conceptual work of James Lee Byers, an American conceptual and performance artist.
On a New York City trip that we took in 2006, we determined, let's go to 2 galleries that we've never visited before. And that took us to the Casey Kaplan Gallery, who then had a much more conceptually focused gallery. And we discovered the works of Tricia Donnelly and Jason Dodge, whose work fits conceptually with our thinking. Both these artists are conceptual poets who make works that stretched our imagination and thinking. So Byers, Donnelly, and Dodge are an important trinity for us. When we moved to Vancouver in 2016, we were introduced to the world of Indigenous art. Our collection now includes works by artists such as Bo Dick, Cole Speck, Marcy Friesen, Janine Freina-Julie, drawings by Mary Ayak, tapestry of Janet Nungnik, and a wonderful print by Luc Anderhagluk, amongst others.
So these are a few of our inspirations, indirectly mentors, over the years who have shared their love of art with us and reaffirmed us in what we do. From Belgian curator Bart Kasseman, we learned that art is slow attention, and art is a reflection of who you are at a certain time. It continues to grow as you grow and change over time. Our relationships and conversations with other collectors, dealers, artists, curators have been key to our evolution as art-interested individuals. So now we have a few slides that we can share with you, and and apologies for the state of the slides. Some of these are quite old.
This is one of the first works we bought. This is Thomas Ruff. He photographed his classmates from the Düsseldorf Academy. The two things about this. One is the scale. You may have seen one of them in the Garrett Mitzdorf first version. When we got this home, we said, what on earth have we done? It was just massive piece. And secondly, my astute wife, who's always way ahead of me with clear vision and ideas, realized this is actually sculpture, which I think became an important revelation for me for later on.
So it was interesting to hear Andrew talk about the camera being really important to you. So this piece is very dear to me. It's another Thomas Roof. It's a newsprint image that he cut images from newspapers, and there's no tagline or anything. But it's, you'll probably recall, it's an image from Breathless, and it's Jean Seberg, where she rolls up a piece of paper and points her lens and focuses on the John Paul Belmondo character. So as the female gaze, and also as this idea of looking and focusing and seeing, this piece is very meaningful to me.
Here are 5 examples of Thomas Struth's photographs from the 80s of various European cities. Candida Höfer, 3 photographs. And examples of Gerhard Richter, certainly best known as a painter, but I'm a big fan of his prints. And here are examples of prints that he made in the 60s. Going back to Andrew's point about the idea of choose work that you're challenged, Georg Harold is an artist from the 80s from Cologne, and we saw an exhibition of his work in New York. I was outraged. I said, what on earth is this? And I just said, he said, taken piles of cement bricks, cover them in canvas, and then put things for out of his pocket on top of this canvas. And this is just rubbish. A week later, we phoned up the gallery and asked to have slides sent. And we ended up buying a couple of his works, and this is one example where he's taken slats of wood, bound them together with, I think, a coat hanger or a piece of wire, and then written on them, and added a piece of tape. But you have to be very careful. You can't get too close to this piece because it might poke your eye out. So I learned from that, well, I hope I learned from that, if you something that outrages you, pay attention. All right.
Oh, I think we missed a slide. Okay. We had a slide in here of James E. Byers, but it doesn't matter. We've missed it. Is it coming up? Okay. This is in our home in Toronto. So we lived in a semi-detached 3-bedroom home, and we turned 2 bedrooms into 1 gallery room, so we could live with our art and make installations and think about art. So this is an installation with, in the middle is a piece by Daniel Roth, German artist. It's actually an acrylic pool filled with water that has food coloring in it, and it's supposed to be like a pool that would go down under the ground and come up, and behind it is a drawing that he made. And in front is a textile work by Helen Mir. This is just to show you that I guess we were kind of risk takers at the time, more than we are now, because we don't have the space. So that space enabled us to do things that we might not otherwise have done. Do you want to talk about Helen?
It's the Helen Mir piece, which she's taken army blankets, and one, she's deconstructed the top army blanket and then sewn it back together again in a reference perhaps to minimalist sculpture a la Carl Andre, and it sits on top of another army blanket.
This is a piece by Nathan Carter that we saw when we had a wonderful studio with him in New York, and we don't have it anymore. It's in the Vancouver Art Gallery collection because when we moved here, it wouldn't fit in our apartment. So we're happy that the Vancouver Art Gallery is now looking after it. And in the front is a work by Jason Dodge, and in the middle, it's hard to see, I'll show you. There's another piece by Jason Dodge. This piece by Jason Dodge is twine. So he says he rode around Berlin on his bicycle and collected all these pieces of twine. And it's called Above the Weather, so the idea is if you were to string all of this together, it would go above the weather. And so what we like about Jason is how he takes us to another place and asks us to use our imagination in thinking about this work. Oh, there it is.
So here's another installation we had in Toronto. On the left is on the wall is a work by James Lee Byers, which is Japanese red paper with gold ink in the middle, and the title of it is Q is Point, and there's a bit of a hole in the middle, and it's covered with stars, and the idea of question is point. The point is to ask questions. Behind that is a sculpture by Trisha Donnelly, and on the floor is a work by Jason Dodge called North. It's a lightning rod that would go on a building. Never used, but would go on. The idea of the potential of the artwork to become something else.
So this is an image of our living room in Toronto, and we were talking about Matt Mulligan. So there is a painting, well, it's not a painting, what is it, by Matt Mulligan? It's a rubbing, and gouache on either side, and some drawings on either side of that. And in the corner on the plinth are 5 tea bags by Mark Manders. Are they Twinings tea bags? What are they?
No, they're what's their English tea bag? Pickwick tea.
So is this an edition? I think it's an edition.
Yes, edition.
So Marshall bought me the tea bags for my birthday, which I thought was a wonderful present. Anyways,
Is it
it's a lovely little edition.
A birthday that had a 5 in it somewhere. You can place it, whatever side you want to place the 5 on.
This is in our living room here in Vancouver. And
You can see on the wall now, 2008, big change for us. We bought a painting, a real painting. So on the wall you can see a painting by the Swiss artist Miriam Kahn. It's called Mit Gepäck flüchten, which you helped me a little bit there. Freibies, but fleeing with luggage is the idea. It's very topical today because she paints a lot today about immigration and the migrant flows from Africa to Europe. But here's an early example that she made in 2007. And then,
sorry,
back up? And then in the corner we have works by Marcy Friesen. You can see a glove that is a fur glove with beads, and on the back are spikes. Next to it is, there it is, Jacopozy Upalak snow goggles from 2019, and a mask by Cole Speck of 2020. And then we've put Cole Speck's box end rendition panel from 2018 next to Trisha Donnelly's fabric work, Cypress Leaf and Ocean Wave from 2007.
really emanate their own kind of energy, and Trisha's really into this ephemeral sense of energy. And it's crazy. I mean, we just love the way they work together.
This is a frontlet by Bo Dick from 1979. A photograph by Marcy Friesen called Oh My Heart, 2022. And then here's the hunting hat, rabbit fur and beads.
How much you selling that one for? Let's start the bidding at...
This is an installation of a woman named Sarah Entwistle. She's British and lives in Berlin, and behind her is a piece by Doug Copeland. So Sarah's grandfather was an architect, Clive Entwistle, and when he died, she received his archive, and so she is now using objects from his archive and repurposing them as a female artist and using her grandfather's history and making her own works. And Doug Copeland, this is debris that has washed up on shore. This is probably work we never would have bought if we didn't live in Vancouver, because it makes so much sense to us here. So it really does show you how your place really informs, I mean, I know this is quite simplistic, but yeah, we all know this. Your place really informs how you feel and how you live and what you think about. This is the entrance at our apartment.
This is an addition that Stephen Waddell did for Polygon, Bust of a Young Boy, a photograph of a sculpture backed by a painting by Carlo Scarpa. So it's interesting, I think this combines many of the interests. The media we're interested in is photography, sculpture, and painting.
Say this was an addition from Polygon?
I think I did.
Oh, sorry, okay. This is a painting by American John Zurier with a ribbon piece by Helen Mira. And do you want to talk about the...
Helen Mirren, an American conceptual artist. This is a hand-dyed cloth. It stretched out to 365 inches long, the idea of the circumference of the globe. And this is, the title is 59 degrees south, which is in the very Antarctic. So it's entirely blue because it represents the ocean.
And of course, can I go back? Oh, I don't think you can see it. It's installed where you can see snippets of the water, so it's kind of a nice thing.
This is an edition that Rodney Graham did for the Art Gallery of York University.
This is our den, and this piece on the table, Go for the Good Spirit, is a piece that Rick Chervenesia made during COVID, and it's on enamel, and it comes with instructions for how to install your home according to Feng Shui rules. Well, I don't think they're his rules, but it's a very beautiful piece. And then on the walls, we have...
Mark Manders, Dutch artist. This is called Perspective Study. Newspaper collage, and then Studio for Propositional Cinema, Possible Worlds, which is a silkscreen on printer's plates, a photograph actually covered up by a mirror called by Abbas Akavan, and then a two-part work. You see the blue glass box, and then the steel sculpture. There is an example by the Georgian artist who lives in Berlin, Teo Georgiadze. And then across to them is a photographic work by Janine Frynett Julie, What If We Were Cousins, archival C print, and a Sitsu scarf behind it.
And you can't really see it.
Oh.
I was going to say the Lawrence Weiner above the door
It's a print on sandpaper.
that says, come what may with a warm embrace, which kind of sums up life, I think. There's
Close-up of the Janine Frynett Julie photograph.
This is in our bedroom, and again, I guess what we're trying to show you is how we mix everything up and how good things go together really beautifully, I think. Do you want to talk about the print?
On the left-hand side is a print by Luc Anghadluk, The Return, and then two photographs by Anna Mendieta, one on top of the other. Then the drawing, stick figure called Sensing by Matt Mulliken, and then three drawings by the Berlin-based artist Iris Schumacher.
So that's Matt Mulliken, Glenn figure.
For some reason, it's not a dotted line, it's a solid line.
Yeah.
The slide shows it as a dotted line.
So this is Teo Georgiadze. It's a very small work. It's steel that's been painted over. So we're showing you these because these are some more recent acquisitions.
In Dash, a commuter drawing, she takes, this doesn't show the scale, it's probably about this large sheet, which she's colored with ink, dark blue and purple. She's folded up and then she carries it around with her, hence the idea of commuter. And then she attaches the wall with two metal pins. This is a work by the late Belgian artist Bernd Lohaus. It's two sheets of paper, one on top of the other, attached by a masking tape.
This is from the 80s, and the other works are more current. Lotus Lori Kang, that Andrew also has is in his collection.
That's actually how we met, was
Yes.
at Catriona's, because we were both, unbeknownst to each other, looking and acquiring two of the three works.
That's right.
And then here we are.
There you go.
It's a photogram, magnets, and cast aluminum. And then Canada's representative in Venice for next year is Kapani Kiwanga from Hamilton, Ontario, but she spent a lot of time living in Paris. This is called Subduction Study number 2 from 2015. It's a pigment print. And what she did research in a Paris museum on the rocks that come from the Rock of Gibraltar. And she discovered that there were rocks from the European side and from the African side. So on the one side, you have a photograph of a rock from the European side and a rock from the African side, and she's folded the African part over the European part, and perhaps a political statement of what she thinks the future may be for Africa as opposed to Europe. This is an interesting one. This is by Kazuhito Tanaka. This might be the most recent piece, not a great slide. We found this in the Arco Lisbon Art Fair in May at a gallery we had only just encountered, and we were quite intrigued by it. Never heard of the artist, didn't know the gallery, but it's a work. The top part is photographic paper that he has taken, ripped up, and painted, and then layered in a kind of a sculptural form. And then he responds to that coloring and formation with oil paint. So he's painted the bottom part. So it's a bit of a painting, it's a bit of a photograph, the whole thing on canvas. So it unites some of our interests of photography, sculpture, and painting.
Small. It's really tiny. Okay, so this, we just have 2 more slides. This is a work by Fabian Knecht. He's formerly a student of Oliver Eliasson. He's based in Berlin. And it's camouflage. And his recent exhibition there consisted of these camouflage nets and photographs of the ruins of the war in Ukraine. And when we walked into the gallery, we didn't know what we were looking at. It looked like arte povera. But what it is, he works with a group in Ukraine, and these camouflage nets were made by people in Ukraine. You might have seen reports on TV of people doing this for the war effort. In museums, they were doing this. So he has an arrangement in this particular case where he was given permission to show this work. If you bought the work, proceeds of the work would go back to a group in Ukraine that is supporting the war effort. So personally, I had this moment where I felt so connected to our present time and to what was happening in the world. I kind of felt a little sick. But this was a perfect example of an artist who made me feel like I was experiencing our time right now. So we acquired this work. And this is our final slide, which is a very happy piece.
It's by the German artist Jan Zöller. The title is Talking About Art in a Designed Atmosphere. It's 250 centimeters tall. I saw this at Arco Spain Art Fair 3 years ago, and I'm not very good at metric yet. So 250 centimeters, sure, it looks okay. Well, it had to come rolled up. The rolled painting just fit in our building's elevator. We got it, and fortunately found somebody who could unroll it and frame it, and here it is. But because of the baseboards, we can't hang it, so it's leaning. But the title, how to resist this title, Talking About Art in a Designed Atmosphere. Perhaps his alter egos are birds. So a man and a woman sitting they're both smoking under designer lamps, and you probably can't see it, but through the smoke there are names of Moiser, Hilm F. Klimt, Hans Beckmann, and other artists floating up through the smoke that they're having a kind of conversation. So this is our self-portrait.
Thank you, all 3 of you, for sharing your collections with us today. It was wonderful to hear the stories behind the works, and really what it shows, what you had mentioned before, and all of you, is like, it's not about acquiring work for the walls, but how to live with it, how to live with the work. I've got a few questions, and then maybe I'll ask you to, just to perhaps, if you have questions for each other, and then I'll turn the floor over to the audience. So one of the things I was wondering, in terms, and you've mentioned it before about the first artworks that you've acquired, and I was wondering, what was it, if there was something very particular about the work that made you take the plunge, I guess related to that now, what are the factors that you weigh up, and what considerations come into play when you're deciding whether to add a piece to your artwork, to your collection, versus admiring it in the public realm? So.
I don't really have, in terms of my criteria, I think I sort of listed some of that earlier in terms of I want to feel that maybe that pinprick moment at first, or something maybe not discomforting, but a bit of tension at first. In terms of thinking about whether I can justify bringing in new works, I'm so far down this rabbit hole, nothing, I can do another payment plan, who cares? I'll eat beans for a week, right? So there's...
Back.
Yeah. But no, I think for me, thinking about my focus areas, but also thinking that I shouldn't be limited to those, but mostly just my instincts and my judgment and my taste as the starting point. And then from there, doing some research on the artist and their CV and just thinking, how does this go in dialogue with some of my works is also kind of an important consideration as well.
You know, we talk about focus, 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 and I will say that I think we might have been too focused at the beginning because we only collected photography, like photo-based, and we were really strict with ourselves. And now, over the years, we've gotten much looser in our approach. You can see, like, you might say, well, we're all over the place, but there are definitely streams, because this is just what we're living with now, but there are threads that go through it. So I think what happens over time is, for me, it's become much more intuitive. So it's good to have a focus, I think, when you're starting. But I think as you go on and get more confidence, you really need to trust yourself. And that's an intuitive thing. I think so. Mm-hmm.
Something I've learned from looking at Indigenous art, I have a feeling that artwork that speaks to you has some kind of power, there's some innate power within that particular work. Like, I mean, there were 3 Lotus Lori Kang photographic works at the gallery that Saturday, and of the 3, there was one that really, I was not interested in the other 2 whatsoever, although they were very similar. But there was something about that one that I have a feeling it not only had some power that spoke to me through my, what's the word I want to use, this Rolodex of information over 30 years of collecting. There was something in that was dredging up all this back information, back history. And so it had to be that one. And if that had not been available, wouldn't have got any of the other ones.
And this was the rare instance where we didn't step on each other's toes. Like, I had felt the same about the one that I acquired. It wasn't even a second or third choice. It was that one or nothing. And so it's funny how upon we shared that information, it was like we knew that those were the works for us. And you're right, they're different but also quite similar.
I don't know if this is at all relevant, but I'm taking back to years and years ago. Ann and I were in Toronto at the Bay, and we've been given some. My mother said, "Why don't you go and buy yourself a coffee pot?" Okay, so we went to the Bay, and we went up to the housewares department. We must have spent 45 minutes going all through these coffee pots, wondering this.
Us $50 that we didn't want to waste.
We left empty-handed. We didn't buy the coffee pot.
Because we didn't really need it.
But an artwork, it might take 10 seconds. That's it, we'll take it. I don't know, where's the logic in it? Well, there is no logic in it, right?
Well, one question I had, and I guess when you were talking about the Volgas, it just made me think about the Charles Clough work on the other side, where the diptych enamel and collage, where Gertz had actually acquired it from the Vogels. And I was just curious if you have ever swapped or exchanged works with other collectors.
Once, but no, it's got so much. We had, trying to think now, it was a Franz Vest sculpture that we didn't particularly like that much. He was way ahead of us.
I was afraid it was collecting too much dust in our home. I was being super practical. And I didn't want to put it under a vitrine. So we were like, this isn't really working for us.
And so we contacted the David Zwirner Gallery about selling it. And anyway, long story short, we exchanged it for a very large Stephen Prina work from his Manet series, which was a very large, just scale work of a Manet painting. And then you get a second piece of paper that goes with it to the side, where I think he did all, I'm going to say 300 paintings by Manet. So this was the grid of all the paintings to scale. And then we had one of those paintings, which I think now is in the Vancouver Art Gallery. So that's the only time we've ever done that kind of thing. It was the last time, too.
And I obviously haven't, but one thing you might have noticed about the talk is we haven't talked about ROI, return on investment, who to collect. like the sort of inside baseball of collecting. Like that's not, I don't intend on getting rid of anything. Like I want to live with this work. I want it to be with me in my space. So that's not a part of my, I'm not to say that that's what you're going with, but like in terms of either swapping or just letting it go, I would have a really hard time because everything feels very special to me.
Like one of the question that I was going towards was in terms of like, you've talked about how your collection has grown and has changed over the years. And I was just wondering, in terms of works that, like, what do you do with work or an object that no longer quite fits your collection? I guess that's where I was going with the previous question.
We donate. We donate, and as we said in our talk, we're happy to donate, and I think, you know, we all evolve and we change, and also from just a logistical point of view, I mean, you can't live with everything, and there's no greater joy than going to a gallery and seeing a work that you donated that's being enjoyed by other people, truly. So, and also from a, as I said, from a caretaking point of view, there are sometimes works that are so fragile that, you know, museums that are happy to have them can take better care of them than we could probably in our own home.
And I guess that I want that to kind of lead towards another question when you mentioned caretaker, like the role of the caretaker, and I was thinking about community, right? And how do you develop the relationship with you know, artists, with galleries, with museums, and then your voice in the art ecosystem and how, you know, how that works for you.
From the perspective of someone who blogs about the art world in Vancouver, and this is maybe under the category of another misconception, is that just talk to the gallerists. Like those art galleries, especially in Vancouver, I find are very welcoming. People are very friendly. The gallerists are very friendly. You just have to have maybe a bit of courage, I guess, to go up and say hi and introduce yourself. But even our trip to Berlin, like the most hospitable people you can imagine welcoming us into their galleries and giving us tours. And in some cases, you know, we dined with them. But to me, that's just, it takes maybe a bit of a first step just to be comfortable and putting yourself out there and speaking to these folks and establishing relationships. In terms of community, I mean, look around the room. There's many folks that I know personally from both the blog and my collecting habits. So it just kind of happens organically in some cases by these types of events, by dinners, by openings, by whatever. So just immersing yourself in the art ecosystem is one way of doing that. You don't have to collect necessarily, but just be present and be open-minded.
In case you haven't noticed, we love talking about art, but we love sharing our passion for art. And, you know, we have found, I think, the art world a very welcoming place. I know there's all kinds of thinking, you know, people are snobby, you have to be rich, blah, blah, blah. You really don't. I mean, I don't know any other community where, I mean, if you're interested and let's face it, serious. You're not joking about the work. You want to learn. It's, you know, it's free, except if you go to a public institution, right? But we've never had an issue with, I would say, I've never felt snubbed. And I guess if...
A couple of times, but then we just don't go back.
Then you just walk away, like...
You've just described New York, is what you're saying.
No,
but
I
also,
mean, no, I mean, you just hang out with people. It's about relationships, and you hang out with people you like, and you have conversations with people who have not always similar interests, but it's always a conversation, no matter where we are. So
A very basic question I always advise people to ask is, go up to the front desk, can you tell me more about this work, please? And depending on the reaction you get, that will determine whether you go back or not.
And then I'm going to ask you about like the challenges of collecting or the challenges of maintaining a collection. Like how do you manage that, or what are some of the issues you faced in terms of, I don't know, conservation, crating, or storage?
I don't want to talk about this. No, because I mean, I live in a 700 square 700 square foot apartment, so like I don't really have space. My storage is an issue, but I'm just kicking that can down the road. Like I really don't have a solution or advice, quite frankly.
Think about it.
I'm going to think about it, so go ahead and inform me.
Space. And in Vancouver, light. Too many windows in buildings.
Yeah, no windows.
We have to pull down the blinds all the time because of the damn sunlight. So if you collect works on paper, you have to be very, very mindful of sunlight.
It is definitely a commitment from that perspective because, yeah, I mean, we care about the works. We don't want them to fade. Every time if we do a reinstallation, I get super nervous because I'm afraid something's going to break, or it's a commitment, and it's a time commitment as well, right? I mean, you know, up until recently we were both working, so you know, just kind of managing. We buy work. When are you going to bring it home? Like somebody has to be home to get it. I know that sounds really silly, but it is a time commitment. It's a time commitment to look after the work and make sure it's safe. And yeah, I mean, there is a time consideration beyond just acquiring the work.
I have a lot more questions, but I'm going to maybe ask you if you have questions for each other first.
Well, I was curious about your choice of the Brenda Draney painting, because you have such strong photographic sensibility. And you told me to stay focused, but I'm wondering if that's the thin edge of the wedge going in some other direction.
I think with Brenda's work in particular, and maybe I'll just skip back to that really quickly here, like 90 slides ago. It's a work, Brenda's work, to summarize it very quickly, would be she stays true to her memory in that she only documents, or she only paints what is true to her memory, so what she can vividly remember, and then she stops. And it's also meant to be a sort of a conversation that you have with the work. It's, by the way, it's a painting on the right-hand side there of what appears to be a figure, or what is a figure lying down, and all that you can see are certain elements of the figure. The only other clue in this work is that the top right corner is the zipper lining of a tent, and this is made in response to a fire that devastated her hometown that displaced many of the people in that community to live in tents. And so she uses tents as a metaphor in her work as not just displacement, but also this kind of tricky balance of, like, we use tents for pleasure, for camping, but then, you know, you go down to the downtown east side and you see tents as people's homes. So I felt like this was a really loaded image. It challenged me in that it was obviously not fully complete. I think I really admire that about Brenda's practice in general, is that she doesn't feel obligated to cover every corner of the canvas. And so for me, I think I just sort of started to break down what it was about this work that made me, like, I had never seen a work like this before, where it was partially painted, it was incomplete, but yet I was able to sort of extract a story out of it. And I like that she doesn't give away all the clues. She's leaving it purposefully very open-ended for you to sort of put yourself there, or also to create an element of mystery. Just a bit of a sidebar, an anecdote that I didn't mention here, but I think is important, is that, you know, I also think of art as my news feed, right? It's the way in which I'm informed of things happening in the world, so both present and past. So explaining that work about Brenda and the Slave Lake fire, like, these are those moments where I'm being informed of things that are happening around me or abroad through art. Question for you, though. What do you do when you don't agree on a work?
We always agree.
Marshall?
Don't we?
No, to be honest.
When didn't we agree?
No, but I would say 99.8% of the time. And if we don't agree, we don't get it.
But the reason why I say we always agree is, I guess we always agree on the work we're going to buy when we agree to buy a work, because we can independently go into a gallery, like on our own, and choose the exact same work without having a discussion. That's what I meant by we always agree.
Cool.
Do you, in terms of like the collecting strategy, do you collect in depth of like a particular artist? Sort of over their career?
We have done in the past. We have always tried to do that until a certain price point, and just say, can't push that anymore. I think that's becoming a bit harder to do these days because the price point keeps going up. I mean, it used to be $1,000, and then 5,000 was the new 1,000, and 7,000 the new 5,000. But you know, you can still find works like that don't cost that much anyway. So if you want, yes, it is possible. We try to work in depth, or else, like the Jan Zuller painting at the very end, we have a number of works on paper of his.
I think it's that is our way of also showing our support to the artists, especially since we do tend to collect a lot of younger artists. It was a nice way to grow up with them. And seriously, we've grown up with a lot of these artists, and for that matter, a lot of the dealers, like we've grown up together. So, yeah.
I think I'll just add to that in one great, if you're looking for a good catch-all opportunity, the Combine Art Fair, which Griffin hosts in December, it's in its third or fourth year now, but it usually brings together 4 local galleries. So if you wanted like a one-stop shop of connecting with local gallerists, seeing what local artists are being presented or international artists, and so that might be a good, in terms of when we talk about, you know, doing a, you know, flyby or getting a good experience, that's one way. You know, Art Toronto, of course, plural, other Canadian fairs, but here locally, Combine, so.
I'm going to open this up to the audience. So if you have a question, I'm going to repeat it for the recording, and then you can answer. Go ahead. So the question is about social relations and how to, if I understood the question, sorry, like how do you, what do you do about artists who are not necessarily part of that network of galleries, gallerists?
We do a lot of studio visits, so this goes back to community. I mean, we've talked to artists, seen artists work before they've been with galleries. So there is a hierarchy in the art world, there's no doubt about it. But I also think if you do your research and if you're interested enough, there are lots of, we all know this, there are lots of artists out there that don't have galleries that are happy to have you visit them in their studios. And I mean, the Vogels were the prime example of doing that, because when they were collecting art, there was no art system in New York. And they were buying directly from artists out of their studios because there was no system. So, you know, you could do that today if you wanted to.
In terms of actually, I mean, obviously Instagram is one way, and not all artists have Instagram accounts and not all share their work, but to me that's one, you know, low barrier to at least get an idea of what's happening, and it's of course both local and international. And the reason why I brought up this slide is because the middle photographs there from Michelle Bouy, I bought directly, I just reached out to her on Instagram and just bought those works. Now she's represented by McBride, but I bought those just directly from her. And then similarly with Kira Pratt, the lantern that's on the ground, the cement lantern, just bought it directly from Kira.
To what's important, not important, but what's nice about sharing your work with people, like if we have friends over or sometimes visitors come, when they see works on your wall, they're like, where did you get that? And then they want to go see the artist or go to the gallerist. So it's nice to share and know that that sharing goes out back into the community.
Other questions? So just to repeat and recap, the question is like acquiring work comes out of the heart and passion, but then there's also this financial side that might eventually need to be considered. And so how do our panelists kind of consider that?
You should only buy what you like, and in all honesty, like never think about it as an investment. I know you've probably heard that a million times, but I mean, if I wanted to think about investment, I'd be buying stock. I wouldn't be buying art. You know, like I just, yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you're thinking about monetizing your collection, I don't really know what to say.
I would probably be a very rich man if I had the magic answer for that. But I think for me, not that there's no foolproof way of doing this, but if collecting in depth at least gives you a solid body of work where you have a cohesive collection of works. That I've not gone down from that road to even consider that part of it. But that's why first and foremost I have to love the work, and then it pays itself off very quickly. Whatever happens down the road. But these aren't lottery tickets, right? This is, you know. But I understand what you mean, and it's a tough area to navigate.
What's in favor today won't necessarily be favor 10 years from now. And if you want to do art and investment, you probably should move to New York full-time and hire a curator to help you, and that you need to have a massive budget. I mean, that's the way the art world works right now. But financial considerations have not entered into our discussions whatsoever. Because if you do, you become crippled, I think.
Too, if we were thinking from a financial point of view and monetizing the collection, you would not be seeing the works that we showed you, because there are certain things that we know one should buy if you wanted to have a collection that you could then turn over or sell.
Don't buy conceptual art. But to Andrew's answer and also Karen's previous question, having a body of work by a given artist, so that I have 10 examples of X, I can then present that to, I'm thinking of a gallery, but I don't know what it is you're talking about, specifically, but I think that buying from the heart and giving from the heart would be quite enough.
Do we have, sure, Lam? Oh, I'll just repeat the question, sorry. So just to repeat the question is in terms of art fairs in Vancouver, and the question was, why do you think that Vancouver doesn't necessarily have like an art fair that's known internationally?
I think art fairs are business ventures, and usually art fairs historically have been created by art dealers, so that's a market-driven initiative.
Don't forget that before there was Art Toronto, the owner of it began in Vancouver and attempted it and gave up and moved it to Toronto. Why did Seattle have an art fair? What's his name? The Microsoft guy. Paul Allen.
He actually helped that Seattle Art Fair start.
So Paul Allen is in Seattle. I've got all this money. I'm buying all his work from the major dealers. Why don't you come to my city and have an art fair? Which they did. He died. Is the art fair still on? It may be, I don't know, but it doesn't register anymore. But the art fairs are big, massive businesses. And they go to where the money is. So Singapore now will probably be coming online, looking at Tokyo, Shanghai, certainly. There's, as wealthy as Vancouver is, it's not big enough population and not wealthy enough people, and there are not enough collectors.
I do think it would be great to have an Indigenous art fair here. And there is one, but it doesn't happen here. But we're not in the art fair business, but that could be kind of nice.
Other questions? Yes. So the question is, if the panelists think that there are art forms that are could be only seen, that could be also be in private collections, not only in public collections. Perhaps can I jump on this like video or performance art? Is that what? Oh, interactive art.
I think that's a really good, interesting question. And I think there are collectors in the world who would buy that kind of interact, but they have to have space. And you have to have a lot of space and commitment. They're more like probably private foundations. I was thinking more along, say, video work. So for a while, we collect a lot of video and film work. We don't do that anymore. It becomes complicated to show, and also the material starts to fade. I mean, we even have remember laser discs? You know, we have mountains of equipment that we had to keep buying to, after a while, I'm not going to buy any more equipment. But I'm thinking that private foundations, particularly in the States and in Europe, would buy the work that you're thinking about, but they have to have massive storage spaces to do that. And then it's on view for a period of time, but not always. But in terms of a private collection, if you don't have the space, you're not going to do it, because you don't want it just stashed away somewhere.
Well, I think we've run out of time. And I want to thank you all for coming. And thank you, Anne, Marshall, and Andrew, for being so generous with your time and sharing your collections and experiences.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was so interesting. And thanks for being so honest. And I think that kind of candidness about where it starts and where it's heading and the textures of it all, it's just fantastic. So thank you so much for sharing today. So Combine Art Fair, I'll just say Combine Art Fair, which is in December, so please come. We will have Willabale, Monica Ray's, Unit 17, and an international gallery to be determined. So if you want to have more conversation, please join us then. We're a friendly bunch. It's in the residency at Griffin Art Projects in December. So stay tuned for that. And there are some refreshments there if you'd like a glass of wine before you go. And also, I just want to remind you that we do have a talk with our current curator in residence, who is Su Ying Strang, who is the director of the Southern Alberta Art Gallery, who's here for 10 days. And she'll be talking online about her work with community next Saturday at 1 p.m. online. Thanks so much for coming today.